on today's episode of the Holistic Savage podcast.
When the skin becomes leaky, it allows the leaking through of a number of things, including toxins from other bacteria and fungi and all that, environmental toxins and so on, all of which triggers an immune response in the skin. And a lot of that immune response then can get systemically activated as well, creating chronic low-grade inflammation.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, functional friends, you all are in for a real treat. So I am here to welcome back my good friend, kind of big brother figure, life mentor, spirit animal, if you will, Kiran Krishnan, the one and only. Thanks for coming back on the show, brother.
It is my pleasure. I got very excited when you asked me to come back on because it seems like it's been a little bit since we've done one of these recordings together, and we've had lots of awesome, fun engagement and hanging out off air, which has been awesome. So it's great to jump back on here and melt our minds together a little bit, right?
Absolutely, brother. So as we were just saying off air, for the the new listeners, the listeners that are coming back to the Holistic Savage podcast, because, we took a hiatus. So you were actually our very last published episode, like 2 years ago. So that episode, I think last I checked, it might be the most downloaded episode that I've ever produced. And, that's amidst people like the holistic psychologist with millions of followers and a lot of other names and everything. So that episode, we really focused on the gut-brain axis, which in a lot of ways is kind of the subject that brought our career paths together, where you're the microbiome guy. My claim to fame, if I even have one, is the whole microglial thing. And that is obviously this hub that is the gut-brain axis. But today, we're going to focus on expanding that conversation, and we'll probably go all over the place. But first and foremost, to the audience, if you guys haven't listened to that last episode or the time before you run, because you've been on twice, this is the third go around, be sure to listen to those because there's so much knowledge there. And this dude, he's like my idol. He's a legend. And I want to take a moment that we can all recognize the work that this man has done to up-level the entire functional medicine space with your success at Microbiome Lab. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. Yeah.
That's very, very kind of you. We, with Microbiome Labs, we set out with the goal to solve a big problem with leaky gut and solve a problem with what I think is a lot of mediocrity in supplementation and, the approach to supplementation, especially what we saw in gut health. And then also a lack of education, because when we kicked off Microbiome Labs, information on the microbiome was coming in hard and fast. And the interesting thing about that is it challenged a lot of the old ideas of what people thought of the gut, and what they thought of as probiotics and ways of helping the gut and so on. And so our timing just happened to be, correct, in that we came in at a time that was needed, I think, in the market. And we were, by one means or the other, able to kind of shift the tide a little bit. The thing that I always get the biggest kick out of is we created a new probiotic category that didn't exist before, and this is the whole category of spore-based probiotics. Now, when you look, if you look at prior to the launch of Megaspore in 2013, so we launched in 2013. 2013, 2014, 2015 market reports, and these are like the biggest companies that do all the product market reports, right? The probiotics was just one segment. And then after 2015, once we started gaining some steam with the messaging around spores and the paradigm shift there, you start to see these big global market reports carving out a section of the probiotic market as spore-based probiotics. Right. And it's fascinating. And then now when you look at 2022, 2023 market reports, the biggest growing segment of the probiotic space are the spore-based probiotics. So just looking at that, it makes me smile a little bit. I'm like, okay, we did something. We moved the needle somewhere, and it's exciting. But to me, all of that pales in comparison to the relationships you built through this process, right? So our friendship and the relationships that you get to have with awesome people. So that underscores, my excitement of being here today and having this conversation with you.
That's so fucking cool, brother. Like, it's so cool. Like you're such a gangster, and I admire it so much because it's like, from my perspective, obviously, we're different people, different paths, whatever, but it's brought us here now, which is just so cool to me. And it's like I've learned so much about, science and research from you. I've learned so much about business and the crazy game that is business with you. Learned a lot about life. And last time we were hanging out, we were doing karaoke in Vegas like 3 months ago. But the fact that, like what you just said, like you're changing, the world markets and pioneering, all this microbiology research, which I've seen such a huge just shift. I mean, I think over the course of my career of 18, as a trainer, nutrition coach at Lifetime, versus where I'm at now and doing the cool stuff, I've seen so much growth, and specifically within the HCP functional medicine space, I witnessed, what microbiome did all the way through, the sale and the acquisition, what they're still doing, and how that has up-leveled the whole industry, where now, because you guys really set this new standard of, research first, right? And now all of a sudden, it kind of shines the light into the shadows and crevices of all the different spaces and industries. And all of a sudden there is this huge emphasis there's a very quick delineation occurring of like who's putting science first and who's not. And it shows. And it feels like it's really shaken up the space. And so that's where, like, currently these days, I mean, I was just at a microbiome Southeast regional event this past weekend speaking for Berkeley. And then obviously what Berkeley is doing with Research First, or I want to give shout out to Research Nutritionals, and I love the work they're doing. But I really give you guys so much credit with that. And now you have all sorts of new exciting things that you're working on in between EndoAxis, PhytoVeda, Skin IV. Before we maybe dive into this whole leaky skin thing, if you want to tease us a little bit with some of these new ventures you're cooking up.
Yeah, absolutely. My mind works in the problem solving mode, right? Like I get super excited and geeked out about problems and finding solutions about them. And that's of course been a difficult thing in like relationships, because a lot of times people just want to talk about their problems, and to me, I never want to talk about them. I want to solve them. And a lot of times what I come to learn in interpersonal relationships is people just want you to listen to them. Yeah. Right. And that's a struggle that I have, because as I'm listening to their problems, I'm going, okay, why don't you do this and do this and do this? And they're like, just shut up and listen. I just want to talk about it. Yeah. But in the world that we function in the world of health, I get super excited about big problems. And with Microbiome Labs, I saw the way probiotics were going, leaky gut, the lack of research, all that was a big problem we wanted to solve. So then I felt we did what we needed to do there. We've handed it off to a biotech company that's kind of taking it to the next level. And then now I'm like, what other problems do we have to solve, right? And these are things that are ongoing in my head all the time. So one of the things, and this is where EndoAxis comes in, is in the world of functional medicine, which is largely about testing to really understand what root cause drivers are. We really have in many ways a big data problem, right? Because there's so many tests to do. And as an FDN, you're trained well in all of the different tests. But then putting the picture together of what all of these different results mean, right? If you do a hormone test, an oat test, a blood test, a microbiome test, you do all these tests and you look at all these variables, the question becomes like, okay, where do you start? And what's really affecting what, right? Like you might see something on the oat test that is like, oh, this is alarming. I want to go after that. But that may only be a problem because of something that's showing up in the gut test, right? And in fact, if you deal with the gut component, this thing should fix itself. So should you go after both at the same time, you might actually create more complications, right? And so to me, the testing is important, but really utilizing that data in a most effective manner is even more important, because I think that data can be misleading for clinicians, because it can be confusing. Yeah. So we said, okay, with regards to this, we need computational support for clinicians to really understand what all of this means, right? And we looked at hormones as one of the first places to tackle this because I think the information coming out on the demographic changes that are occurring in these current years. So as millennials are inching into the early 40s, right? So millennials are now in the perimenopause state. And so we have a huge percentage of the population that's perimenopause, menopausal or postmenopausal, or in the case of men, andropause, right? Or periandropause. We have a huge shift happening in hormones, and data is coming out that's showing that people in their 20s and 30s are seeing hormonal changes that are typically seen in perimenopause, right? And this could be driven by many different things: unhealthy guts, unhealthy environments, endocrine disruptors, all of that stuff. But nonetheless, that's a big problem. So we did a social listening study that looked at 12 months of social listening in all of these different groups and all that, on the topic of hormones and hormone dysregulation and so on. What we came to find out was that consumers were incredibly confused as to what it means to have hormone dysregulation. They were incredibly confused as to how certain symptoms relate to hormones, right? So even things like anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, right? Weight gain, all of these things, they have a cursory understanding that, okay, that might be my hormones that are out of whack, but they don't really get it. And then the most alarming part of it is the confidence rate that consumers have in the medical establishment with regards to hormones specifically is like 1 or 2%. Right. So the confidence rate is so low, which means people have a lot of confusion, a lot of anxiety about it, and they don't know where to turn to it. Right. So we said, okay, clearly hormones is a big issue. And hormone imbalance and understanding hormone imbalance is a big issue. So we started looking at all the clinician friends that did hormone work and all that. And what we come to find out is, of course, most of them use the Dutch test, which is probably the best test to really understand what's happening with hormones in your body. For the people listening who are not familiar with it, it's Dutch stands for dry urinary metabolites. So they're really looking at the metabolites of hormones, right? It's one thing to look at a static picture of where your estrogen is, where your progesterone is, where your testosterone is. It's a whole other dynamic area to look at all of the metabolic byproducts and their levels within of those hormones in the body. So it tells you a true picture of what's actually happening with your hormones in the body. The problem with it, it's a phenomenal test. The problem with it is it's very complex and then very complicated, right? It's a 17-page report. I'm sure you've looked at a lot of Dutch tests in your time. It's really hard to connect all those dots, right? There's so many variables, 37, 40 variables in there. And so what the lab has done successfully is created this clinical consult team to try to help practitioners understand what that test result means. But they can only go so far in helping you interpret it. And then they also can't tell you exactly what to do about it, right? And so we saw that as a big gap. We said, we have a great test here. We have a good way of understanding what's happening with hormones and giving both people and practitioners confidence in understanding the dysregulation patterns. And then we have an opportunity to give them very specific therapeutics for that dysregulation, but we need computational power to do it. So we got the best hormone clinicians in the world. And the top one to me is Liz Bartman, who's part of our team. She's been on the Dutch team for 7-8 years, been one of the head clinicians there. So she knows the test inside and out, and she's like an absolute hormone savant. If you ever want someone on your program that can talk hormones in their sleep, she's the person to do it, right? She's absolutely amazing. So we went through with her, we deconstructed the test, every single variable, what the literature says about every single variable and all its ranges, and how it connects to every other variable, right? So we created this massive, complex Excel sheet with the most macros and connections and programming in there I've ever seen. And then we took this thing and we gave it to programmers to codify into an algorithm. And so we created this robust algorithm from scratch that's over 200,000 lines of code. And this algorithm now can read that hormone test and give you a very in-depth interpretation of it, very quickly, within seconds, right? It's going to take a day or so now because we're reviewing every test manually. But once we fully automate it, it's going to be in seconds that you can get this interpretation. But it's pulling. We've input literature, like thousands of citations and all of that stuff. It's stuff that's impossible for a clinician to do, right? And in our digging in of all of this, we come to find out that in women alone, there's over 250 different patterns of dysfunction in hormones, right? Take estrogen dominance, right, which is one of the most common hormone dysfunctions. The probably accounts for 75% of the hormone dysfunctions that women face is estrogen dominance. It sounds simple that, oh, your estrogen is too high, or your estrogen with relationship to progesterone is too high. But we found out that there's over 100 different versions of estrogen dominance, and you have to treat each of those slightly differently, right? In men, we have over 100 different hormone imbalances that patterns that we can find. So we've gotten so in depth in this, but we're finding the real patterns, the real root cause drivers. And so when you upload your data on that, you get this amazing analytical report the practitioner does. It numbers your pattern. It says you are sex hormone pattern, 200, your adrenal pattern 37. And then based on the pathologies of those patterns, there's a combination of products that's specific to those pattern dysfunctions. So now we can give people exactly a deep understanding of exactly what's going on and exactly what you should do from a therapeutic perspective as well. That is impossible for any clinician to do in reviewing that test in 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, even 5 days. It would take them forever to get that kind of in-depth review, right? And then the big picture of this is, this is where I'm going with the bigger picture of solve, is we're starting with hormones, but then we want to create similar algorithms for, blood tests, oat tests, microbiome tests, genetic SNPs, and then a centralized machine learning system that takes inputs from all of those and creates a prioritization workflow for that patient, right? Because again, if something's on this test that's actually downstream of an effector over here, you should be treating the effector rather than the downstream symptom, right? And so we want to create that prioritization list to create a full picture of the patient so that every practitioner can have a comprehensive view of their patient. Because what practitioners tend to do is they kind of default into the thing that they're most comfortable with, right? Some practitioners are like gut people, so everything is seen from the perspective of the gut. Some are, blood markers. Some are oat test people. They get really good at that. So everything's from the perspective of that. So we want to give people a much more comprehensive view. And the most important part of all of this is our technology is also embedding in it a way of tracking outcomes. To me, that's the biggest problem we have in the world of holistic functional health, is we don't have outcome data on our approach, right? Which means it's always going to be fringe medicine, because the allopathic side has great outcome data to show you why they do what they do, right? If you go into a doctor, you have elevated cholesterol and family history of heart disease, they're going to put you on a statin. And the reason they can put you on the statin is because they have longitudinal data that, hey, statin's going to reduce your cholesterol. That's going to reduce your heart disease risk in their data by X amount. So that's the standard of care, right? We don't have good outcome data on, hey, what happens if you reduce your weight and take a fish oil and do this and do that, right? We don't have that data. So it becomes fringe and a belief system rather than based on data. And so to me, we need technology to collate. If we have, 1,000 practitioners using the same approach for estrogen dominance, right? And then we collate those 10,000 patients worth of data and show the outcomes of that over time versus hormone replacement therapy or the other things that are being done. That's what will bring our practice of medicine more to the mainstream and make it more accessible to more people, bring down the cost, validate it in so many ways, bringing the actuaries, right, who are looking at risk models. And the actuaries may actually go, you know what, this is a better way of doing it. It's going to reduce our risk down the road, financial risk, right? So they make it part of corporate wellness programs. And so it opens up the world for it. Now, I may not be around to make all that stuff happen, but we said, let's get this started,
Yeah.
So that's the big picture with EndoAxis, and that's only the first one. So I promise the other ones will be faster.
This episode is brought to you by Microbiome Labs. I've been a raving fan of Microbiome Labs for many years now because of their cutting-edge research, novel microbiome solutions, and heartfelt culture. Many supplement companies exaggerate their product claims and have no research to back up what they say. Microbiome Labs, on the other hand, has up-leveled the entire functional medicine industry by modeling a research-first approach. Microbiome Labs has advanced the research of the human microbiome and offers many innovative tools to improve whole body health through the garden of life that is the microbiome, including the BiomeFX stool test and the total gut restoration system. While I have used virtually all of their products successfully with my private clients, some of my favorite products include the Megaspore Biotic, their flagship product that is a multiple strain endospore probiotic that promotes microbial diversity, mucosal barrier and intestinal lining integrity, short chain fatty acid production, and whole body health. I also love the Mega IgG 2000, which is pure serum bovine immunoglobulins that act as a defensive shield in the gut to bind and neutralize many pathogens and toxins, such as lipopolysaccharide, gluten proteins, mold toxins, exotoxins, microbial components, and so much more. I also love to use their Myomax, which is a specialized form of vitamin K2 that promotes mitochondrial function and energy production. It's actually clinically researched and shown to increase volume of oxygen, or VO2, which is a very powerful indicator of cardiovascular fitness. Be sure to visit the Microbiome Labs link in my show notes to learn more and get your microbiome support today. This episode is brought to you by DHA Laboratory. Whether you are a self-healer trying to get to the root of your chronic health complaints, or a functional practitioner looking to provide your clients or patients with the best lab testing available, DHA is your one-stop shop for all your lab testing needs. DHA offers self-healers the ability to order a wide range of lab testing to empower their self-healing journey with actionable data, while providing practitioners a consolidated lab test ordering experience to cut down on the hassle of ordering many tests from many separate labs. DHA Laboratory is also a pioneer in advancing the research of cryptopyrrole disorder, a commonly overlooked root cause factor in a myriad of mental health disorders. DHA is also the exclusive provider of the Mental Map, which is a cutting-edge lab panel that I personally designed to help self-healers and practitioners get to the root causes of their mental health struggles using the most clinically significant and relevant biomarkers available. Be sure to use the link in my show notes to learn more about DHA Laboratory to up-level your self-healing journey or functional practice today. That all makes perfect sense. It's exciting to get that in-depth insight, because I've known a little bit about it, and makes perfect sense. That's undoubtedly the future. And really, even with my young, ambitious self, like that's sort of the direction I'm wanting to go with the mental map. I've been started as a research panel, primarily blood-based biomarkers and kind of the mental health microglial, angle. And I'm crunching all that data through Biocanic to collect that ecosystem and correlating it with, the tracking the symptoms over time. And something, as I was listening to you talk there, I'm constantly preaching through my institute how we need to spend more time tracking physiology than chasing root causes, right? And that is essentially exactly what you were just saying with that. Because, functional medicine, I've been talking to Nicole about this a lot lately, where it does kind of feel like conventional medicine is kind of going through a little bit of an identity crisis, but now so too is functional medicine, where I see it every day reflected to me through my platform, where more and more people are getting grumpy about functional. I've had people say functional feels like a scam because it's all out of pocket, all these expensive tests. You're just putting me on 30 supplements. And does it even really work? They're expecting, overnight changes like a drug, a pharmaceutical. And it's like, nutraceuticals and stuff, botanicals, probiotics, you're not going to feel it overnight. It's not like an ibuprofen or a SSRI or something. So the only way that we will ever not be fringe and mainstream accepted and be able to reach the masses is through the data. That's the critical point of conventional has that. It makes them legitimate, but there's the shortcomings of that model. And so like I see it all going this way, and it's just such exciting times and stuff like that. So be interesting to see, maybe over the next decade or two, we'll build some of that out with the mental map and stuff. It'll eventually will be this huge ecosystem with all the things in it. But
Well, and that's
yeah, go ahead.
part of our interest is, at some point, we don't necessarily want to build out all the algorithms from all the different ways of analyzing the physiology, right? It'd be awesome to be able to partner with lots of different companies. So that's exactly the model would be is, coming to someone like you and going, hey, how do we either co-develop or how do we support you in your development of a clinical algorithm for the mental map?
Mm-hmm.
And then how does that plug into the central analytical machine, right? So that we can provide more congruent continuity for how do you approach these conditions. And that's where I also see a lot of issues, right? Because we don't have a lot of data on outcome and how that translates to changes in people's health and so on. There's a lot of belief that occurs in our world, right? So when you talk to like 10 different clinicians, they may have 10 different approaches to the same problem, right? And they just, I just believe that this works better. I believe that this works better. I use this ingredient. They're like, no, I don't believe in that ingredient. I think it causes this other issue. I believe in this ingredient. And that's because there's no standard kind of model of how you go after these things. And in order to validate a model, you need data that shows that model works, right? And so that's one of the things we want to create is that with the hormone side, if a practitioner analyzes from the Dutch test that this person's probably estrogen dominant, right, which is probably not a hard thing to do, then there's a bunch of generic estrogen dominance supplements that they can give them, right? So they can give them some DIM and they can give them some sulforaphane here to help detox and so on. And so they're kind of piecemeal the approach. The problem we've seen is depending on the pattern of estrogen dominance, many of those supplements, the DIM supplements, for example, and so on, may have ingredients in it that are actually not good for that pattern, right? So with that patient, you're pulling together of the same 4 or 5 products that you normally do for estrogen dominance may not work, and your outcome may be actually worse. But then for your next patient, who you also think is estrogen dominant, it may work well, right? And then it's confusing for the clinician, and you go, this approach worked really well for this patient, but it didn't work at all for that patient, right? And so it creates this constant throwing shit against the wall approach, right? Because it's so hard to collate why it works here, why it doesn't work there, and so on. So we want to try to alleviate some of that confusion as well by using computational power, right? That's the part that to me is so important, is that we kind of get everyone kind of on the same page, and then hopefully prove that certain approaches, and many of them will be somewhat customized, because the way we do it, it's actually kind of customized, right? So we have 27 different products that we've created. Most people will get some combination of 2 or 3 of those 27 products. 2 different estrogen dominant individuals may have completely different combinations based on their pattern, right? So it's actually customized to that individual. And one thing I think we all know is that everyone's kind of a little bit different, right? So, and everyone's condition and problem is a little bit different. So that's where we're really hoping that the computational power will assist in discerning those differences and how to approach each of those people slightly differently, but utilizing the same model of approach.
I think it's super exciting because, like, when I first was introduced to Chat GPT by my care well representative of all people. At first I was a little bummed because it's like, well, shoot, that sort of like levels the playing field, and why bust your butt trying to be so knowledgeable when you can just outsource it to AI. However, it's like, no, this helps us advance and evolve faster. What happens when you take smart people and you give them the tool of AI to speed up everything that they're trying to do, right? And looking for patterns that the human mind and human egoic subjectivity can't possibly comprehend, and then you're disillusioned by your own blind spots that you don't even know are there, right? Because to your point, like, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And what really excites me about what you just said, because in the functional medicine space, which okay, like conventional, the excess myopia, right, everything's treated differently. Functional, it's almost like the opposite problem of kind of like, well, if we touch every system, it'll all fix itself, right? And to me, both being lovers of the microbiome and everything, the concept of like gut health and the microbiome being like ground zero of your whole body health, to me, that ideology got more traction than anything else. I've never heard somebody say, well, if you just fix the hormones, then everything else will self-correct. But we do all kind of feel that way about the gut and the microbiome. I certainly, have preached that many times. And, it makes a lot of sense from a physiological hierarchy. Or like nitric oxide's pretty cool, right? Because it's like, well, nitric oxide kind of like makes everything better depending on the context. But what I think will be exciting in time with what you guys are doing at EndoAxis, how much do we get proven right versus wrong? And there's going to be a lot of nuance there, because that question sort of becomes like, yeah, maybe you are a more hormone centric practitioner. And are we correct of like, sure, I mean, hormones have a lot of immunomodulatory properties. So like theoretically, could you fix the immune system or fix the gut just by doing hormone modulation, or kind of vice versa? That's what gets me really excited about that, because, some people might say there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, and that's true. Or even think about this perspective of, you're more of a psychotherapist, you're a somatic practitioner. So you're more so correcting physiology by way of the psychosomatic sort of axis, right? And then how does that play into like, oh, well, actually, by doing breathing exercises and somatic work or psychotherapy or whatever, actually we see microbiome compositional changes in response to that, while also modulates like your HP axis. So, but we need that data, and that takes quite the machine to be able to compute all that. So that's what just gets me so jazzed about it.
Yeah, it's super exciting, because I think what we are on the verge of being able to start is really a revolution in how we approach functional and holistic health, right? And we have great partners like FullScript. We're launching this exclusively through FullScript. They see the vision, they have similar vision, which is great. So we're well aligned with them on that. I love that, Mark and the team at Dutch has created this phenomenal test, and they are so painstaking about the robustness and accuracy and all that of the results of the tests, more so than any other lab I've seen in our space. And then we get to play a role of kind of putting it all together and making it, functional, bringing utility to it. So it's very exciting. And when you look at hormones in the gut, this is actually an interesting aside that may be relevant to some of your audience. We know that how hormones function in your body does affect your gut. And then, of course, that effect on the gut has further effect on the hormones. So it's like a continuous cycle. This is why women, as they reach perimenopause and go through menopause, the latest data shows that probably the main reason why they see a dramatic increase in heart disease risk and a stroke risk and all these things that women didn't have as high of a risk of as men did in their 30s and early 40s. Now in their 50s and 60s, women kind of catch up to men in terms of risk of those conditions, right? One of the reasons is because when you start to drop the amount of estrogen and progesterone you make, you actually directly impact the diversity of the gut microbiome, right? So because part of part of the cycling of the hormones is it's dumped into the gut and it feeds certain microbes. Hormones actually can act as prebiotics in the gut, right? And it's fascinating that when your hormone levels start to drop, you see a concurrent drop in the diversity in the gut microbiome. You see an increase in permeability and endotoxemia, and you see an increase in systemic inflammation, now bringing on the increase in things like heart disease, dementia risk, and so on in women, right? So women had this, will have this physiological protection to a certain degree from some of those issues when their hormones are in flux and in balance correctly. But as they reach the age where it starts to decrease, they start to catch up with men with some of our risks. So it's fascinating when you see the role between the hormones and the gut and all that. So this is another reason why for us, like hormones became a big focus area. And then we also know that we've got endless number of endocrine disruptors and things that attenuate hormone production, phytoestrogens, xenoestrogens, all these things in our diet and all that, right? So there's so many things that are assaulting this delicate balance that hormones have within the system. So we're super excited about getting this out, and it'll be out very soon.
Yeah. And I love the interconnectedness of all of it. Like that's what's so fascinating. And with what you just said on that, kind of estrobolome, gut microbiome composition, cardiovascular risk as estrogen, steroid hormones are dropping. With the work I've been doing with Berkeley lately, as just diving down this infinite rabbit hole that is nitric oxide, my God. And so it's like, that's one of the big things I've been, digging into a lot lately with, okay, as the estrogen is dropping, well, that downregulates endothelial nitric oxide synthase expression, right? So then that's increasing risk of hypertension, cardiovascular issues. But then to your point too, something that I'm trying to spearhead, and this is the perfect medium to be, communicating this, because in the nitric oxide space, which feels messy and very nuanced, and to me, from whatever my perspective is worth, it feels like there's this elephant in the room that's being avoided because it's an inconvenient narrative. If your narrative is, we'll just pump people full of nitrate and promote nitric oxide always, because one of the big contexts that I'm seeing with chronic disease and menopause and perimenopause, we have this sort of chronic nitric oxide synthase dysregulation where like, okay, estrogen is dropping and that's decreasing the endothelial NOS. But then because of that leakiness, that endotoxemia, that's driving a lot of the inducible nitric oxide synthase. So we kind of have this like standard American metabolism chronic disease picture where, the eNOS and nNOS are sort of uncoupled and dysregulated, but then iNOS is on full blast, cranking out thousands of times. So even like I was texting, our mutual friend Tina Moore, and she's like, I'm not sure how I feel about nitric oxide yet, because some of the stuff I read makes it sound like it's disease promoting and bad. I'm like, right, that's the iNOS nuance. And this is the perfect segue. I don't think we can go into all of it, but this is a good segue of you and I, by way of Berkeley and PhytoVeda, we're cooking up solutions for exactly this.
No, it's fantastic, and I love how you're thinking about it, right? And that to me, when you started working with Berkeley, I knew you guys would get into some of these painstaking details of the mechanisms and the physiology, because I'm a big believer in nitric oxide. I think it's such an important tool in general, because endothelial function, circulation is like foundational to the function of the body, right? And it's so interesting that with age, with changes in lots of in hormones and with a lot of things we do from a lifestyle perspective and all that, we really disrupt circulation and we really disrupt endothelial function. And so, of course, it's then no surprise that peripheral vascular disease and then all the things that can be tied on to that, right? Even issues with your organ systems and all that, and then organs getting enough blood and circulation, and aging, of course, as a component of all of that. all of that stuff sits on the function of the nitric oxide system. And so it's such a foundational component, but all I'd ever heard about it was boner pills, right? It's a boner pill, right? And that's the part I was like, what? It's so much more than that, right? Like it requires a different way of starting to deconstruct it and look at it. And then of course there was conversations around hypertension, which is great, that's good, but it goes even deeper than that, right? And I love the approach they're taking. And with PhytoVeda, I'll just give a quick brief on it, but I think your explanation with how you guys are looking at what we're doing with PhytoVeda and how you incorporate that into your nitric oxide component of it is super interesting. But PhytoVeda is just it's another problem that again we saw that needed to be solved. We're big believers in herbal medicine and plant medicine, right? Of course, it's the original medicine, and plants hold amazing components that can effectuate our physiology in a very profound way. That's actually where you can get some of the pharmaceutical-like effects in some of these phytochemicals, right? And so, but there's a problem with it in that, number one, the proper identification, traceability of the plants is always a concern. There's been some big cases and big issues, with retailers that are carrying hundreds of herbal products, and then they do genetic analysis on those, the source of those herbal products, and they're not at all the herb that it's supposed to be coming from, right? And nobody really knows what's in the powder, and it's not identified properly and all that. So there's a big traceability and identification issue on, is this the actual right herb, right? If it's ashwagandha, is this truly Withania somnifera? Is it the right strain, right species, and so on? Then beyond that is like, okay, with plants, where is it grown? Right? How is it grown? What is the soil conditions? Because plants are going to pick up all that stuff. Just like we all are so now getting conscious about how our animals are raised that we eat, right? Where are they? Is it free range? Is it grass fed versus factory fed? We know that makes a difference in our health and our outcomes, but that's true for plants as well, right? Is a plant grown in the right conditions? Is the soil healthy? And you have no way of knowing that. If you buy an herbal product, an ashwagandha off the shelf, you look at the product that says ashwagandha back of it, you have no idea what that was grown like, what else is coming along with that extraction, right? So we wanted to bring really good traceability to that. So that's one of the key things we're working on, is like, we want people to know where it was grown, what the soil conditions were when it was grown, who's the farmer that extracted it, and so on. Then the other aspect of it that requires some advancement is that many of these, the identification of the actives within these plants are, analytical chemistry that was done 25, 30 years ago, right? If you look at ashwagandha, for example, there are 7 active components that are within the withanolides, withanosides. Those are the names of the compounds that you find within ashwagandha that have been identified that is part of the U.S. pharmacopoeia standard. So if you go, I want to put out an ashwagandha product, and I want to make sure it's ashwagandha, then you have to find these 7 active ingredients in it. But that was chemistry that was done 25 years ago. Chemistry's advanced quite a bit since then. So we said, what else is in there? It can't be just these 7 things. Plants are far more complex than that. So we found, upon even just first pass of doing some more advanced analytical chemistry, that there are 4 other active ingredients within that same spectrum, right? And we're like, well, these have never been identified. And what do they do? We know that these 7 do adaptogenic things and help with mood and sleep and all that. But what do these other 4 do? Well, we started deconstructing those and doing studies on those. We come to find out that those 4 have amazing longevity effects, right? They increase telomere lengths. They attenuate mTOR, and we know that a lot of people have overactive mTOR, right? And there's a lot of genetic steps that drive that as well. So it has all of these implications for mitochondrial cellular longevity and health. But it's never been defined. So we said, okay, this is kind of a new understanding of ashwagandha. We have 4 new active components. We have to now create a new extraction process that ensures we're pulling these 4 out as well at adequate levels, right? So we've revamped a lot of the analytical chemistry and the extraction process. And we've done the same thing with Boswellia, which is an amazing plant that has all of these anti-inflammatory active ingredients, and then this unique version of celery seed, which is grown in northern India, which has an amazing array of COX inhibitors, so pain and inflammatory signaling inhibitors, arachidonic acid, attenuators, and so that's PhytoVeda is a very exciting thing for me because we're basically doing the next evolution that's required in plant-based medicines, right? So that people who then do practice holistic health and companies that are putting out really effective tools like Berkeley now have additional tools to support your mechanisms. But I loved how you guys thought about those ingredients when you learned about them and how it fits into your paradigm.
This episode is brought to you by Berkeley Life. This is a company that has become near and dear to my heart as leaders in nitric oxide testing and therapeutics. I was actually given the opportunity to join the Berkeley Life family as their Director of Clinical Education, and I'm very proud to be working with Berkeley Life to advance the science, the research, the testing, and therapeutics around nitric oxide, which is such an amazingly fascinating subject with no limit to its clinical application. Back in my bro science days, when I was about 17, 18 years old, I was a sales associate at GNC selling supplements. And back then I was really big into bodybuilding and just really the meathead lifestyle. And in the fitness junkie world, we've all embraced nitric oxide for many years for its ability to help us train longer, train harder, and recover faster by promoting vasodilation and blood flow. For some reason, it's taken well over a decade for the functional medicine space to catch on to the infinite clinical potential of nitric oxide therapeutics. So this is where Berkeley Life is advancing the field by bringing novel testing strategies and therapeutic supplements to help patients and clients transcend illness, build wellness, and optimize performance. I'm very proud of the work that I'm doing with Berkeley Life and highly encourage you to check out the link in the show notes where you can sign up as a Berkeley Life practitioner and even get more clinical education from yours truly. Or if you're a self-healer, you can leverage the healing power of nitric oxide by getting started with our salivary nitrite test strips, our nitric oxide foundation dietary nitrate product, and many more exciting products to come. Well, I appreciate that. I kind of pitched Nicole on it first, and then we went to the higher ups, and had to really kind of break it down because unless you're a big science buff, it's not the most intuitive thing, and it's very fun for me. For one, we're super excited to have the opportunity to work with you because we just love the shit out of you. Number one, obviously. Number two. It's fun for me. I'm working on some cool stuff behind the scenes because it takes me back to the beginning of my career as 17, 18, where before I was even a trainer and nutrition coach, I was selling supplements at GNC as a, supplement educator, sales associate. And, in the fitness supplementation world, we've embraced nitric oxide forever. The narrative is train longer, train harder, recover faster. And that's scientifically sound and accurate. And, this is 14, 15, however many years ago at this point. And then now all of a sudden, nitric oxide's kind of all the rage in the functional medicine space. It's starting to make its rounds. But, I've been looking at the iNOS, nNOS, eNOS nuance and kind of pumping nitrate. And it was actually really fun when we were in New York for IHS, and we pitched this strategy of here's the elephant in the room in the nitric oxide space that nobody else is talking about. And, we already have a solution for it. And so I'll just tease the audience for now of you can just stay tuned for later this year and, we'll see what rolls out. So, but thank you for that breakdown. I'm getting all manic over here because just talking to you is so exciting. it's one of the most intellectually fulfilling conversations I've had in a long time. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. Same with you.
Yeah.
And there's so much to be done, and there's so much there's so many problems to solve.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to be able to play a role in moving the needle a little bit on some of those things. And the skin was the other thing that became such a apparent issue that needed to be solved, and that's really based on some of this long-term study called the Baltimore Longitudinal Study on Aging, which is a fascinating approach to aging from a study perspective. Should we jump into that?
Yeah, let's talk about this, leaky skin, microbiome of the skin. Let's do it.
Yeah. So it's obviously the skin is how we show up in the world, right? And we all want to have good looking skin, and it hopefully looks our best. And of course, we know that there's a lot of issues that people experience with their skin. Some of them are probably more cosmetic than others in terms of how we think about it. So we think about aging of the skin, right? So fine lines, wrinkles, hyperpigmentation, or just lack of uniform of pigmentation, right? Dark spots and so on, thinning of the skin, drying of the skin. All of these things are age-related issues that we go, okay, that's a function of time. And we want to try to combat that. So there's lots of solutions that people use to combat the appearance of those things, right? But what does it actually mean when your skin starts to look like that or start to show symptoms of age? And this is where the science became really fascinating to me, because there was a study called, there is a study, it's still ongoing, it's called the Baltimore Longitudinal Study on Aging. And what's different about this study compared to any other aging-related studies is most of the studies take a cohort of people, let's say in their 70s and 80s, and then they compare them in many different ways to a cohort of people in their 30s and 20s, right? So they look at biopsies, they might look at cellular function, they may look at biochemistry and so on, and then to try to discern, okay, what does it look like with these mechanisms when you're in your 70s and 80s versus when you're in your 20s. The problem with that approach is that those people who are in their 70s and 80s went through many different things than the people who are today who are in their 20s and 30s, right? The world when they were 20 and 30 was completely different than the world now when these people are in their 20s and 30s. So it's not a real apples to apples comparison, because the control settings of these two groups of cohorts of people are completely different. And so the set of researchers with amazing foresight 50 years ago initiated this study and said, okay, we're just going to follow individuals who are in their 20s and 30s, thousands of individuals, and then see how they change over time. So using each individual as their own control, right? Which is the best way to do it. And then look at over that period of time, over the next 50 years, all of their choices, the variables and their diet and lifestyle and all this stuff, and how all that impacts their physiology. And then ultimately what they want to know is disease risk and mortality, right? So that's what they want to come to find out. Now, here's the super surprising part about this entire 50 plus year study that's still ongoing, is that one of the best predictors of mortality and chronic disease risk that they came to find out is how these individuals' skin looked, right? The age-related symptomology of the skin was one of the best predictors of their health outcomes. Now, when I first saw this, and I'm sure this may be running through your head as well, we go, okay, that makes sense because the skin is a reflection of the inside, right? So they're unhealthy on the inside. You see that on the skin. So then the skin is reflecting that these individuals are at risk. That's actually not true. So what they come to find out is not only is that not the right way to look at it, it's actually that the skin issues preceded the unhealthy physiology on the inside. And then the skin is an independent risk factor for the chronic disease that they've shown. So they've been able to connect through lots of publications that have come out of this long study that the aging of your skin and the physiological changes of the skin were predictive of osteoporosis, We're predictive of dementia and Alzheimer's, of heart disease, all of these things that are seemingly unrelated to the skin, right? We know skin and skin cancer, that's all related, right? But skin and osteoporosis, right? You go, how does skin and bones, how are those two things connected? And so this is the fascinating part of the physiology that they've been able to show. And a lot of it comes down to this loss of barrier function in the skin, because the skin is a true barrier system compared to the gut, right? So the gut is a barrier as well, but the gut is a very different kind of barrier. It's a very dynamic barrier. It's actually supposed to let lots of things through and supposed to prevent certain things from getting through, right? In an unregulated manner. This is why the gut's ultimately the barrier of the gut is this mucose layer and then a single cell line, right? And that single cell line has a way of opening up to allow things through, but then shutting down when it doesn't want certain things to go through. Compare that to the skin, which is a true barrier like a wall. If you look just at the epidermis alone, the epidermis has so many layers to it and so many different types of cells within that layer, all piling onto each other like bricks on a wall, right? And the topmost layers are dead skin cells, so they're not effectuated by things. And then the bottom layers are live skin cells that are controlling things, modulating immune response, and so on. You've got an embedded immune system in there. You've got this ceramide layer, this really important fatty acid layer that's in the epidermis that we'll talk about in a second, the importance of that. And then you've all this protein structure, right? You've got collagen, elastin, and all of this protein matrix that acts as another trampoline-like barrier. So the skin is supposed to be a true barrier. Things are not supposed to go through. Right? The only thing that really goes through is like UV radiation to a certain degree, and that stimulates. We've adapted to utilizing that energy to produce things like, activate vitamin D and produce vitamin D and so on. So what tends to happen in general, in short, because we could talk about this for 2 hours, but in short, what happens is when the skin starts to look aged. So when you start to get symptoms of fine lines, wrinkles, hyperpigmentation, bigger pores, lack of uniformity in the skin, and so on, what that's indicating is there's a dramatic physiological change in the barrier function of the skin, which prior to that was a change in the microbiome of the skin. Just like in the gut, when the microbiome of the gut, the native microbes in the gut change, it makes the gut leaky. When the native microbes on the skin change, it makes the skin leaky and it dismantles some of the normal structures of the skin. When the skin becomes leaky, it allows the leaking through of a number of things, including toxins from other bacteria and fungi and all that, environmental toxins and so on, all of which triggers an immune response in the skin. And a lot of that immune response then can get systemically activated as well, creating chronic low-grade inflammation. So the skin becomes an independent source of dramatic chronic low-grade inflammation, which can then disrupt physiology throughout the body, right? So this is the most simplistic explanation of how a dismantled skin microbiome, thereby a dismantled skin physiology, leads to leakiness of the skin. And then that in itself becomes an independent risk factor for chronic disease. And it was the best predictor, one of the best predictors. I'd say in looking at the studies, most of those studies concluded that the skin was the best predictor of how you would fare in terms of your chronic disease and mortality down the road.
Wow. Okay. So that's exciting. I think back to like high school anatomy of the integumentary system or organ. It's the biggest organ of the body, right? Your skin, your meat suit. So it makes a lot of sense. And, for a lot of years in the functional medicine space, we have taken that approach of like, okay, inside out, right? Fix the inside to fix the outside. If we can correct the gut, how many social media posts have I seen that's like, fix your gut to fix the skin on the outside. But, again, that's kind of subjective myopia and something, being friends with you for so many years now and learning from you with changing the way I look at things. And I always kind of try to look at things through the lens of evolutionary biology of like, why would this make sense from, that perspective? Because it's like, this world was dominated by microbes long before little, egoic humans ever fell out of the existential petri dish. Um, but, I think about just we used to live in the soil. We used to roll around in the bed of microbes underneath us and breathe it in and bathe in it. Or you look at every dog I've ever known, like will roll around in the mud or roll its face in its own shit every opportunity that it gets. And it's like, there's probably a reason for that, right? So it makes a lot of sense and now I have like the Predator movies with Arnold and he's covering himself in mud to hide from the predator. But that microbial interface, right? That sort of line of microbes. And so I would imagine like the skin itself, it's going to have tight junctions, but you're saying it doesn't really have that same sort of intentional permeability with maybe the occludins and zonulins and so it's more supposed to be a constantly tight sealed junction all the time. But then when we have this sort of would it be a dermal microbiota that's becoming dysbiotic? That's
an epidermal, actually, an epidermal.
Okay.
So it's higher levels of the skin, and it's so to maintain the physiology of the skin itself, right? So the key components, a ceramide layer, the proper function, like on the face, for example, of the sebaceous glands that produce the oil and the sebum in your face, or on your body, collagen and elastin function, all of those things, and immune, the relationship of the immune system to the skin as well. Mm-hmm. All of those things require a really homeostatic microbial ecosystem on the skin. And just to give people a little one-on-one on skin microbiome, so there are over 1,000 species of bacteria that live on our skin. If you look at bacteria and fungi and all that, and different parts of the skin have very different ecosystems, right? So the face, for example, the face and neck are considered sebaceous tissues. The reason they're called sebaceous tissues is because they have a lot of sebaceous glands underneath. So which means that it produces a lot of sebum and a lot of oil, right? So everyone knows your skin and your neck tend to be much more oilier than the dry parts of your skin, like the forearms, the legs, and the torso, and so on. Now, what that means is the microbes that have adapted to live on the skin tend to live largely in anaerobic environments, right? Because they get into the pores get filled with oil. In that little microenvironment, there's no oxygen. So microbes that do well with oil and do well with low oxygen tend to colonize the face. So those are Propionum bacterium, Cutibacterium, and so on. Microbes that do really well in the drier environment tend to be on the forearms and the torso and the legs. And in fact, your forearms, torso, and legs in those areas tend to have much higher diversity than your face, right? Now, in all of this, you've got homeostatic commensal organisms, just like in the gut, commensal organisms that conduct functions that improve and maintain the function of the gut, like producing short-chain fatty acids to rebuild the mucosal layer, increasing the expression of the claudin, occludin proteins that you mentioned, which are the tight junction proteins, right? Modulating immune response, telling the immune system, hey, you don't have to respond to these things that are coming in through the diet, but pay attention to this thing that's a problem, right? All of that relationship, the same thing occurs on the skin. So just a couple of examples of that. The oils that are constantly being produced on the skin, even on the dry parts of the skin, you produce some degree of oils. Those oils are metabolized by certain groups of bacteria to produce acids that maintain the pH of the skin. Skin's pH is low. Skin's pH should be around 4.5, right? Ideally. So between like 3.75 to like 4.75. That's ideal. Now, why is that pH so important? Well, if you go above that pH, it dramatically increases the risk of fungal growth on the skin, right? Bacteria do well in an acidic environment, fungus don't. So when your pH goes up, you start to get malassezia growing, you start to get candida and other things starting to grow on your skin. What happens if that happens chronically? Well, in the case of malassezia, for example, that can grow on the face and areas of the neck and the scalp, it dramatically increases your risk for Alzheimer's. Now they're coming to find out that people, as they're aging and you start to see a higher and higher growth of this fungus can actually get into respiratory canals and all that and increase microglial activation and macrophage activation in this area, in the central nervous system, right? And that becomes a risk factor for dementia and Alzheimer's. And of course, in the meantime, you'll start to see skin-related issues like seborrheic dermatitis, right? Or perioral dermatitis. So you start to see little red marks and reddening and drying of the skin. You start to see flakiness in the scalp. Those are all symptoms of the skin microbiome changing, thereby the skin physiology changing. And then that actually over time becomes a risk factor for much more serious conditions, right? Anyone would be much more concerned about dementia with flaky scalp, but it's the same pathology, right? And so the flaky scalp just comes first. And so then you have microbes, for example, that help turn over the top layer of the skin, because remember, that's a dead layer. So you need microbes to metabolize that dead layer of the skin, and they produce a lot of protease enzymes, for example, that break down the structure of the cells and get rid of them so that the new layers of skin can show up. At the end of the day, what that starts to look like physiologically is, if it's not happening, if you don't have enough of those microbes, your skin starts to look very dull, right? As you see, as skin ages, it starts to look very dull. It doesn't have that glow. The glow comes from an effective turning over of the top layer of the skin. And so the dullness of the skin also becomes an issue, because a lot of those cells hanging around can start driving oxidative damage to the rest of the skin levels below, right? Because you've got DNA and all these proteins and all of those dead cells that are becoming oxidized and damaged, and it can start driving oxidative stress to the rest of the live skin layers. And that can damage the skin further and cause senescence. We all know senescence is a big issue in aging, and one of the types of cells that become very susceptible to senescence on the skin are the melanocytes, the ones that produce pigments, right? So when melanocytes become senescent, what happens is they become zombies that just continuously produce pigment for no reason. You get a dark spot, an age spot, right? This is where age spots come from. And it starts with this disruption of the microbiome on the skin. Another very poignant example is when you lose diversity, for example, in the body, right, of the skin, you start to get an overgrowth of Staph aureus. The overgrowth of Staph aureus can start causing lesions on people's bodies, right? You start getting little cysts or little pimple-like lesions all over the place. And a lot of people have this issue in the underarms and the back and all that, right? You start to get little lesions. The problem with that is Staph aureus, not only is it causing a lesion in the epidermal layer of the skin, it actually causes a recruitment of immune cells to that region. And now you have an overt activation of immune function in the dermis of the skin. Right? That can very easily translate throughout the rest of the body as well. But that continuous immune response starts to break down the barrier there of the skin, allowing Staph aureus to go further and further in the skin layers. It also breaks down, that immune response breaks down the ceramide layer of the skin, which is that very important fatty acid layer. Now, the reason that layer exists is because that acts as a very important barrier, because fatty acids don't allow water through. Right? That's the main thing that maintains moisture in your skin. You don't want a lot of evaporation of water through your skin, because it'll dry out your skin immediately. And when you dry out your skin, then collagen, elastin, and all that doesn't function properly. So the ceramide layer acts as an oil barrier, preventing water from evaporating from your skin. And then as well, the oil barrier traps toxins from entering into the skin, right? Because fat does a great job of grabbing toxins. Many toxins are fat-soluble toxins, hence bile and the liver and that whole same function, right? So internally, we have the same thing. You can think of ceramides as kind of like the bile of the skin to trap toxins and all that. But inflammation, immune response, damages that ceramide layer, and you start to dry out the skin. So one of the most common things that people face with skin issues is atopic dermatitis, right? Atopic dermatitis looks like a dry, flaky area of the skin, right? So why is that happening? Well, that's because that area happens to have an overgrowth of Staph aureus. Staph aureus is causing the immune system to come and attack that area of the skin. That continuous immune attack causes itchiness and dryness because the ceramide layer is broken down. So that part of the skin is losing lots of moisture. It's getting dry and flaky. It's also itchy and irritated because of the immune response, right? And so this is why you can have atopic dermatitis on one little part of your hand, but this other side of your hand doesn't have it, right? Or down or 2 inches below doesn't have it. It's a lesion in the specific area. The reason the lesion exists there is because there's too much Staph aureus right there. Right. And so there's so many examples of how changes to the skin microbiome start to affect the structure of the skin and the basic functionality of the skin, which leads to cosmetic changes that we all notice, right? Hyperpigmentation, wrinkles, acne, eczema, all of these things. But the scary eventuality of that is the loss of barrier function, and then that becoming a risk factor for chronic disease. So someone sitting here listening to this may be dealing with, let's say, autoimmune conditions, right? And they've been working on their gut and all that, which as they should. Those are very key drivers of that kind of condition. But they may not realize that their skin is also contributing to that issue. And they may just be noticing some fine lines and wrinkles developing, some lack of uniformity of pigmentation, dryness, and all that stuff. But those are cosmetic things that people think about, right? They're not thinking that, holy cow, that's a sign or a symptom of a dismantling of my barrier structure. And that in itself could be a big driver of my condition, right? That's the nuance that we're really setting out to educate people on.
I mean, that all I'm learning. I'm taking mental notes, and it's fun through my career path. I'm getting exposed to areas of health I probably never would have explored on my own. It is sad that nitric oxide. Some people only think of it as like a boner pill because it's so lame. Like it's some. And don't get me wrong, I'm not invalidating or discrediting the people having issues with that. It's never been on my radar, like sexual health or skin health and stuff like that. But the way that you were able to so eloquently weave that into things, I'm very familiar with it. Even like the flaky skin on the head connecting to microglial activation. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And it makes perfect sense though. And certainly, I'm sure we could go for hours there's probably a long conversation to be had on, how do we really promote good skin health? And I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is spending more time in nature. Would that be probably like step one kind of? And then, because I want to, as we move towards a wrap up, give the audience some good actionables where, I think nature exposure to expose the skin to the natural microbial landscape. And there's probably a lot to be said about the hyper sterilization of our world. There's, probably an antibiotic factor, or then probably most importantly, what is being put on the skin, aesthetics and anti-aging are just such hot markets. And I can't keep up with, my girlfriend's at the med spa right now. She just did a chemical peel this past week. So her skin was falling off her face. She'll probably cut me when she listens to this. But, and I'm kind of looking I'm like, you do you, boo. But, I'm wondering, it's like, so some of these, cosmetic peels or chemical peels and the Botox and Sculpture and all these things, is that kind of more a Band-Aid? Is that causing more harm to the, microbiota of the skin? I'm curious your perspective on that.
So it's interesting. I had a great interview with Dr. K. You might, people may be familiar with her. She's a plastic surgeon that's quite prominent on social media. And that was one of her main questions is she's like, I do injections all day. I do all these things that disrupt the barrier of the skin, right? Chemical peels, microneedling, all of these things. The question is, do we know what that does for the skin microbiome? Now we're coming to understand that the balanced microbiome of the skin is so critical, not only for the overall health of the skin and how it appears to the world, but then also all the health implications. And the short answer is we don't actually know. There's not a lot of studies on it because this is such a new area. And so one of the things is I'm going to start working with her on doing some cases to understand, like, okay, when you inject in different parts of the skin, what is that actually doing to the microbiome of that part of the skin, right? Certainly chemical peels, anything that to me disrupts the epidermal layer of the skin, even though it can have a beneficial look after it starts to heal and all that, it's certainly disrupting the microbiome of the skin, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's disrupting it in a good way or maybe a bad way. We just don't even know yet.
Yeah.
But what we do know is things that are antimicrobials, antifungals, all of these chemistries like phthalates and preservatives and all that in skincare. We do know that those have a very disruptive function on the skin microbiome, right? So those are the things we really want to look out for. So if we want to give people some actionable steps, one of the best ways of maintaining and managing a balanced skin microbiome and having the right diversity and all that stuff is you have to look at the skin as the residents of the skin is resident microbes that live permanently on the skin and are with you forever. Their numbers will fluctuate based on your choices that you make. But then there's transient members of the skin as well that you pick up from the environment and other areas that when they sit on the skin temporarily, they're normally there for just a few days, they effectuate quorum sensing on the skin. So they can change what the residents look like and help some of the residents while they're on the skin. This is where a lot of the benefit of being outside in nature and all that comes from, right? So we mimic that with this product, the Siv Biome Balancing Serum. And as it turns out, it's the spores that do that so well, right? The hypothesis was the spores do quorum sensing really well in the gut. Do they also do it on the skin? Because they are ubiquitous in the environment, right? In the natural environment, we'd be interacting with them. So we started formulating a product with a couple of key spores in a serum, and we started applying it to the skin. And we're seeing from our skin microbiome studies dramatic shifts in the skin microbiome, bringing down of pathogens and toxin-producing organisms and age-driving organisms. So, for example, one of the physiological changes that occurs, or microbiological changes that occurs on the face as you age, is you get lower Propionum bacterium and higher levels of a different group of bacteria that's related with age. And we were able to show just over 3 weeks we can bring back the Propionum bacterium and bring down the age-driving microbes, right? We can bring down Staph aureus dramatically and increase Staph epidermidis, which is a very beneficial microbe. In the case of people with acne, they tend to have very high levels of Cutibacterium acnesis, which is driving the inflammatory lesions. We can bring down the levels of that Cutibacterium acnesis in 3 weeks, and you start to see a 40% reduction in acne lesions, right? We just completed a 315 subject study, and we saw an 89% response rate on redness and acne in the 315 individuals. So profound changes in a short amount of time. We have a number of dermatologists looking at various types of dermatitis. They've got some great cases so far. We're starting studies on that. It mimics this whole bringing on of the right transient microbes to effectuate changes in the skin, and then these microbes fall off, right? So daily application of the Siv's Biome Balancing Serum seems to do that. Now, on top of that, getting outside, like you said, is super important because you want to be exposed to microbes in the environment. And then I would say almost step one in all of this, getting outside, I would put a step two. Step one is becoming more and more conscious of what you're actually putting on your skin, right? Makeup, for example, most makeups have no testing on skin microbiome and the effects on the skin microbiome and how that changes immune response and all that. So people really need to be cognizant of how do I limit the amount of makeup I use, or if I use makeup throughout the day, am I cleaning it off effectively when I get home, right? So like, for example, if you want to be, at work and you want to have makeup on, that's great, right? You want to look a certain way. But when you come home, do you want to keep it on the rest of the night as you're having dinner and all that? Or do you want to get home and clean the skin and put a biome balancing serum on and so on, so that your skin microbiome can start to rebalance, right? Throughout the day. And then like your personal care products, so lotions, deodorants, all those things, you want to avoid things in mercury, with phthalates, with parabens, and all of these active antimicrobial compounds. At the Siv Care, if people follow us at Siv Care on Instagram, we're putting out a series of 18 or 19 different little short videos on ingredients to watch out for in normal personal care products that have a negative impact on your skin microbiome, right? So if people go to the Instagram profile, they'll start to be able to follow that series, and I think that's a really important part, right? Because that's something that just hasn't been on our radar. With the world of cosmetics, you can put almost anything together and make it a personal care cosmetic product. And we just are now starting to think of, wait a minute, what does it do for the skin microbiome, right? So it's a nice evolution, because I think if we can drive some of that awareness, and there's other companies doing similar things, I think it's going to benefit people overall if we start thinking about the skin microbiome.
Oh, absolutely. It's brilliant. And so to the audience, I'll be sure to make sure we have the Instagram handle for Siv, and then I have nice affiliate links so you guys can try out that Siv serum. I feel very, inclined to now go take a bath in Siv serum. I want to fill up my bathtub.
Right. So what I did, it comes in this little, bottle, and it's 1 or 2 drops. So for normal application on the face, you actually put 1 drop on either side of the face, and you rub it in the face and neck. But to me, I need it all over my body, right? So I was in many locker rooms in my life, in high school and even college and all that. And, from time to time, if I don't take care of my skin on my body, I will get like a little staph thing, that pops up. And so I've started becoming more conscious of that. And so now what I do is, when I lotion a lot after I shower, of course, I put about 5 or 6 drops in my thing of lotion and rub it in, and then I use it all over.
Okay.
And it's been a game changer for me, especially on my upper back, where the skin tends to get kind of rough and a lot of bumps and things like that. That has just completely smoothed out for me. And the back of my arms as well was an area that I always kind of got a lot of bumps and a lot of irritating things. That has really improved quite a bit. So you can absolutely use it all over.
Yeah, I'm gonna borrow some of those tips. Could you put it in a bath? Is that a dumb idea, or is that kind of smart? If you're dropping some in a bathtub?
You absolutely could. Yeah. We haven't tried it that way. Just maybe the dilution is a lot, but
yeah, I was going to say,
but it's not going to do any harm. I think if anything, it'll have some benefit, and it may be a good way of getting it into some of the more intimate regions, where you want some good bacteria hanging out, that can do some quorum sensing. So I would sit in it for sure.
Yeah, makes sense. And is there anything beyond? I mean, I think it's kind of like a oil base or something, but it's spores. Is there anything else in there that's kind of having the therapeutic effect, or is it really the bacillus spores driving that? It's
really the bacillus, and it's about the carrier that we created for it. Number one, we want it to be skin mimetic, meaning it mimic the skin physiology really well, because we want it to get a little bit past the very top layer of the epidermal layer to get in where many of the microbes are, and where the spores can also modulate immune response. Because one of the things we get in that, especially in the 315 subject trial, is that it dramatically reduces redness and inflammation in a very short amount of time. We're talking about 1 application. A lot of people see a big difference, right? So for example, if you have a bump somewhere on your face or your body, right? It's an inflamed red comedone. You put the sieve on it and you go to bed. You wake up in the morning, in at least 89% of the cases, not only will that bump be a little bit smaller, but it won't be nearly as red. It may not be red at all. Right. Or if you have an inflamed area of your body, you do that. The same thing is noticed. And that's because we're able to carry the spores a little bit deeper into the skin, where it can modulate immune response. And we know the modulatory effect because we've worked on this for over 10 years in the gut. So we know how powerful they are in the gut. So that's it. It's a couple of fatty acids and then the spores, and it seems to be changing things for people dramatically.
Super smart. So audience, functional friends, go get some serum, some Siv serum through the link in my show notes. Now, before I let you move on with your life, I happen to recognize you're wearing a pretty gangster t-shirt.
It's my favorite t-shirt now.
I think it looks great on you.
Well, thank you, my friend. It's such an important cause, right? I think we all wear things every day that we think just looks cool, but it's rare when you can wear something that not only looks cool, but supports something that's really important. And this t-shirt supports your research institute and research in men's health and a number of areas. So, my message to people is everybody should be doing something to adding to the collective scientific knowledge, right? Because as we increase our collective scientific knowledge, we improve our ability to help ourselves and help each other and understand how we function. And it's really hard for an average person to contribute to science. But you can easily do that by doing something like buying a badass t-shirt like this, where the proceeds go towards research, right? So I'm really proud of you that this is something you started, and I'm proud to wear the t-shirt and display it as well. And my encouragement to everyone is do whatever you can to add to the collective knowledge and the scientific basis. This is such an easy and also very aesthetically pleasing thing to be able to do. So do it.
I really appreciate that, man. And yeah, to the audience, it's a little, it's interesting. I did go through a lot of work to set up this 501c3, and it's an interesting feeling as like a self-made entrepreneur, don't have a college degree, started my career scrubbing toilets, to have candidly have a man of your caliber, that is supporting my work, sees the value in it. It's very humbling. But yeah, audience, I'd appreciate if you support the cause so I can actually conduct some cool research and maybe do it in collaboration with this guy. So, but Kiran, my friend, it's such an honor to call you a friend, a mentor figure. This conversation, we covered so much ground, so much ground. And it was easily one of the best conversations I've had all year. So I truly appreciate your friendship, your time, and for coming back to the Holistic Savage podcast.
The pleasure's all mine. It's an honor to be here. And thank you so much for having me. And for everyone listening, thank you for listening. If you spend your time listening to stuff like this, you're just enriching your brain, enriching your life. So continue listening, because knowledge is power, right? And we need more of it.
It absolutely is. So be sure to check out the show notes. We'll have lots of good links that you can check out. You can buy a t-shirt, get some Siv serum. You can follow this man on social media. I'm sure we'll bring him back on the podcast as many times as he allows me to. But Kiran, I'll be looking forward to catching you at a conference, hopefully sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Thanks for listening to the Holistic Savage podcast. This is a Wellness Out Loud production produced by Drake Peterson and edited and mixed by Mike Fry. As always, if you liked this episode, please rate it and review it on your podcast app. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. See you next time. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.